Hello and welcome everyone to our new Grow Zone training. A warm welcome to everyone who's new to the Grow Zone. And welcome back everyone who's already participated in our Grow Zone training. Let me quickly talk to you about our Grow Zone training. Our Grow Zone training is designed to help you develop your communication skills and your leadership skills. Today we'll be talking about effective communication. In order for you guys to get the most out of this, there are 3 rules to my training. The first thing is that this is a safe environment. So whenever you guys meet up in groups and do exercises, please remember that that's a zone where everyone can try out what they can already do, but also try out their borders. So please appreciate everyone's effort and do not laugh at people. The second thing is feedback. Most of my trainings contain feedback. Whenever you give feedback to people, please remember to be concise and constructive so that you actually give people feedback that they can work with and learn from. And the third thing is respect. Please be respectful with each other in the trainings to make it possible for everyone to learn and grow. All right. Today, I'll be talking to you about effective communication, and I will explain to you the exercise. The exercise can be done in groups of 4 people within the next month. So please find yourselves on a Grow Zone, fix a date, and get training. All right. Now, go on to slide number 2. All right, that's our agenda. So today I will talk to you about how to communicate effectively, and then it's up for you guys to communicate effectively and try it out. Going on to slide number 3, how to communicate effectively. Most people will start their training with talking to you about how to structure a speech or how to speak. But I today want to talk to you about how to listen. Why? Well, there's the saying that a good conversation is a conversation in which you listen 80% of the time. Well, why would you do that? When you listen, you learn something. You may learn something new. You may learn something about the person you're talking to, and you may learn something about the relationship of you and the person you're talking to. Also, listening builds trust. There is research on patient-doctor communication, and in this patient-doctor communication, the trust in the doctor is higher the more the doctor listens. And not only that, the doctor is also perceived as more competent the more he or she listens. So by listening, you are by no means seeming less competent. On the contrary, you're seeming more competent. And also, the third reason is you can even learn more. Well, how do we listen? Maybe some of you have heard of the 4 pages to a message by Friedemann Schulz von Thun. He's explaining the 4 aspects that can be found with almost any message. The 4 aspects are factual aspects, a request, self-revelation, and a statement about the relationship. Let me explain this to you. The factual aspect of a message is something that's actually in the message. So if I say to you, the scarf is green, the scarf is green is the factual part of the message. Then a message can be a request. For example, if I say, I'm cold, I might want to tell you to close the window. Then to every message I send to you, there's a part of self-revelation. So by saying something in a certain way, you know that I'm right now happy, sad, stressed out, whatever it is. I'm telling you something about myself. And the last thing is relationship. So in a conversation, any statement also reveals a certain aspect about a relationship. Now let me give you a full example. Imagine a couple sitting in the car. She's driving, he's sitting next to her, and they're at a traffic light. The traffic light turns green, and he says, the traffic light has turned green. Well, the factual side to this message is just that. The traffic light has just turned green. The request is maybe, well, it could be, please go. The self-revelation may be, well, there are always many ways to interpret this, but a self-revelation might be, he's really impatient, and he cannot stand waiting at a traffic light when it's green. And the fourth aspect is the relationship aspect. Also, this is not as clear as the factual aspect of the message, but he might be saying, I love you, darling. Please go now because otherwise the other drivers will get mad and start honking, and I want to protect you from that. It may also be completely different, and he might be saying that he doesn't like sitting next to her in a car because he thinks she's a bad driver. And that's saying something about their relationship. So with the factual side, that's actually pretty straightforward. And also requests, we're pretty good at listening to requests. But sometimes we tend to forget that there's a self-revelation part to every message. So sometimes when people yell at us and they're mad at us, maybe they're also saying something about themselves. And by listening to that and talking about that, we might have access to a person. And also, every statement says something about the relationship. So these are the 4 aspects of a message. And they're not only the 4 aspects of a message, but also they represent our 4 ears. So some people tend to listen on the factual ear a lot, maybe natural scientists. So whenever somebody's saying something, they pick up just straightforward what they've said, and they don't pay attention to what this says about the self-revelation of that person or the relationship. Some people might only be listening on the relationship level. So they might be saying things like, do you not like me anymore? When people have just said something that they meant in a factual way. So I invite you to pay attention to what people say around you and how that can be interpreted on those 4 levels. Maybe you can find out which type of listener you are. Do you listen to factual things a lot? Do you see a request in almost everything people around you say? Or are you interpreting stuff? Are you the psychologist who sees something in the other person every time the other person says something? I invite you to pay attention to that and expand your listening skills. All right, going on to the next slide. Slide number 4. A good conversation, again, is one in which you listen 80% of the time. So what do you do 80% of the time? What to do when listening is be active. The first thing is establish eye contact. By looking at someone, you assure them that you're actually paying attention. The second thing is have an open posture. So if I'm talking to you now and my body's facing you, I again show you that I'm paying attention. Well, imagine us in a conversation and you're telling me a really interesting story and I'm like this. Well, probably you will think that I find your story quite boring. So an open posture and eye contact is helping the listener tell the person who's telling a story that they're actually interested. The other thing is nod and smile. Same thing. And also, we tend to say yes or mm-hmm, oh yeah, to let the other person know that we're still with them. These are the 4 basics of active listening. Open posture, eye contact, nod and smile, say yes and mm-hmm. Well, these 4 basics go within, for example, German culture. In other cultures, this might be quite different. So there are certain cultures in which eye contact is perceived as aggressive. If you ever find yourself in that kind of context, please be aware that what's good and normal in Germany might not be in a different culture. Also, nodding and smiling is something interesting. There are studies about what smiling means to the listener in different contexts. So in Asian countries, for example, in Japan, people who smile a lot are perceived as dumb. In Germany, the opposite is true. So people who smile a lot are perceived as more competent. Again, what you think of as basics mean different things in different cultural contexts. So please be aware and observe whenever you're not in a German cultural context, what would be normal and appreciated in that context. In Germany, eye contact, nodding and smiling, open posture, and saying yes, is a good way of active listening. Then there are 3 more advanced aspects to active listening, and they're summing up what other people say, asking questions, and talking about emotions. Well, if someone's telling you a story and you can sum it up in the end, you can show that you actually listened. Asking questions may also show your interest. So if your best friend is telling you about her great vacation, Asking her some more questions will show her that you're really interested in her vacation and how it went. Again, at this point, be aware that asking questions can also be perceived as inferior. So for example, if you're in a leading position and the only thing you do in a meeting is ask questions, but not questions for other people to report something to you, but questions that reveal that you don't know what's going on, questions may be perceived as a lower position. So with questions, again, it really depends on the context. And the same is also true for talking about emotions. This may be an aspect that's a little difficult to achieve because we're not all that used to talking about emotions all the time. And this advice comes from, again, from doctors' patients communication. Because when a patient comes in and he's talking about his or her problems to, I don't know, clean the bathroom, as doctors might want to know what exactly those difficulties are, if they have pain somewhere or whatever it is. But mostly we forget to talk about the emotions. So what does that do to the people who can't clean their bathroom themselves anymore? Here it might come as a relief to actually voice what you hear. So maybe a patient talks about their difficulties to clean the bathroom, and you can pick up some sadness. So you can say, I feel like you're sad that you cannot clean the bathroom yourself anymore. And this might be a relief to the patient, who may then talk about their emotions. And the same is true in other situations. For example, if you meet someone in the elevator and that person is in a really angry state, sometimes it helps to name the game. But with emotions, again, it really depends on the context. So sometimes you don't want to open that kind of thing to because then sometimes people start to talk about their emotions a lot and you don't know how to get out of it. So again, asking questions and talking about emotions are two things that are really helpful in conversations and can show people that you listen, but you have to think about when to use which technique. All right, and that's how you listen actively. Now we'll talk about something different, and you can find that on slide number 5. I also want to talk to you about positions and interests. To communicate effectively, it's sometimes good to move from focusing on positions to focusing on interests. And what does that mean? A position is I want. An interest can start with I need, I believe, that kind of thing. So here's an example. When refugees started coming in, Germany took in a lot of refugees. And they said that they want other European countries to take in refugees as well. So a position might have been, Germany wants all European countries to take in refugees. That's a position. The interest is more about why would Germany want that? Well, Germans thought that, and still think, that people who are fleeing from war and crime deserve asylum. And that we are obliged to give these people asylum, but we cannot take everyone in ourselves. So we need other people's help. All of a sudden, it's not, I want you to take in refugees as well, but more, I need help because I think taking in refugees is our obligation, but I cannot do everything by myself. So please help me. And there's a totally different tone to that. So by focusing on positions, on interests instead of positions, you may have a totally new access because all of a sudden a whole new field opens because in a conversation, the other person can also tell you about their interests. So all of the sudden, you're a lot more focusing on agreement or a possible space for agreement rather than I say this, you say that, and it clashes. All right. Well, maybe you're asking yourself, how can I focus on interests? And we're talking about that on slide number 6. All right. How to talk about interests. One of the most important things is put yourself in his or her shoes. So try and think what the other person might need. And then you can move through this checklist. The first important thing is that you know what you want. So you can ask yourself, what do I want? Why do I want it? If there are a number of things that I want, which are the most important things? and where would I be willing to have compromise. Then learn about the other person's interests by asking the same questions. What are your interests? Why? What do you need? And what's really important to you? By doing this, you create space for an agreement. You can then try and agree whenever it's possible. So instead of voicing every concern and yelling out every no, you can try and say yes whenever it's possible for you. Also, a little trick is to say yes and instead of but. This sounds really easy. In fact, it's not. I invite you to check out how often you say yeah, but in a conversation. And then think about which would be possibilities for you to say yes and, because it makes a difference. For example, when you're talking about new ideas, sometimes people start saying, yeah, but this won't work because, instead of saying, yes, and I think on top of that, we could do that. So sometimes creativity is blocked because people right away say, yeah, but, and kind of cut you off in your thinking of a new idea. So when you want to be creative, say yes and explore different possibilities together. Try it out. All right. The last thing is reframing. And an example of reframing would be the minimax interventions. What is reframing? Reframing means that you take a sentence that somebody says and put it in a different frame by rephrasing. So you change some words, and thus the meaning slightly changes. And the mini-max intervention is reframing in the context of quantity. For example, you may know people who say, I don't know, you never listen to me. Well, if your friend tells you that, first of all, it's probably not true, because it's almost never, always, or never. Meaning that most things happen with a certain frequency, but it's not happening in every single case. So always and never don't apply. But if I tell you as a friend, you never listen to me, it's a really absolute statement that is really hard to overcome. So as a reply, you might want to say, I'm sorry, I realized that oftentimes I didn't listen. Do you notice the difference? I've gone from always to oftentimes. So mini-max interventions are about little steps of rephrasing quantity. Instead of always, you can say oftentimes. Instead of oftentimes, you can say sometimes. Instead of sometimes, you can say rarely. And then, again, you'd be moving to never, but with that, be careful. And this changes a lot. So imagine yourself in a conversation where someone says, you never listen to me. You're like, and then you apologize and say that sometimes or oftentimes you didn't listen. All of a sudden, you're talking about certain situations. You can then go on and specify which situations that would be. But if somebody says you never listen, it's so absolute, there won't be any room for negotiating for agreement. So if you talk about interests, reframe and open space for agreement. All right. Again, I invite you to try it out. I invite you to start reframing little things. Be careful. If you change the meaning too much, people will think that you didn't listen. Well, if I say, you never listen to me, and you say, yeah, I understand, I always listen to you, then the other person will be like, no, I'm telling you the opposite, you never listen. So even with those mini-max interventions, go step by step. Don't take the meaning of a message and reframe it so it's the opposite of what the other person meant, because they will feel like you're trying to play a trick on them. All right. So know your interests, find out what the other person's interests are, create space for an agreement, and do so by rephrasing or for ways of getting to talk about interests instead of positions. All right. Moving on to the next slide. Now I will talk to you about structure, of how to structure a statement so that the other person can listen, understand, and remember what you said. I will talk to you about two structures, and the first structure you will find on slide number 8. It's about structuring speeches by being sexy. Some of you might know this, for others it's new, so I'm going to explain it to you very briefly. SEXY is an acronym, and it stands for state, explain, and illustrate. And how this is done, I will show to you on slide number 9. Imagine that you're in a situation where an interviewer is interviewing the interviewee, and you're the interviewee. You can convince the interviewer that you're good at giving structured statements by using the SEXY formula. So you state, for example, I think working in your company is the best possibility for my personal development. And that's your statement. Now you start explaining what you mean by that. You explain, because of the intensive in-house training. And then you illustrate. I read that in the past year alone, 70% of your employees took part in in-house trainings. And by that, you're stating what you want to say, explaining what that means, and illustrating it with an example. The example could be different. So, for example, you could illustrate and say, because of the intensive in-house training you offer. I took a rhetoric and communication skill training 2 years ago, and it helped me improve my negotiation skills. Now I want to develop even further, and you can help me by that. So there you're giving a personal example instead of naming some numbers that are known within the company already. All right, so you can be sexy by stating, explaining, and illustrating. But in a conversation, there are other ways to structure your statement as well, and we will talk about that on slide number 10. And the second thing to structure your statement is the connecting structure. So you can connect to others by repeating what your partner said, by commenting on it, and by bringing your own point. And how this works, I'm explaining on slide number 11. Repeat what your partner said. For example, you just mentioned that you didn't think the in-house training was the most attractive feature of your company. However, this facet is important to me as a young professional. That was repeating and commenting. And then you can bring your own point and say, therefore, it would be helpful to learn more about the career paths for young professionals in this company. So here you can see that we've shifted topics from in-house training to career paths for young professionals, but still we had a connection. This is really important in conversations and discussions to not only be throwing arguments at each other that are not connected, but to connect arguments and build on what other people have said in the conversation already. So the two structures you now know are be sexy and connect to others. All right. And this terminates our input for today. And I will now explain to you the exercise for the month. Let's get started on slide number 13. This exercise is called What Do We Want to Do Tonight? And it works as follows. Within a group of 4, each of you will pick a position. And the 4 positions for what we're going to do tonight are go swimming, see a movie, go work for food, or play games at home. So you meet up in groups of 4 and everyone takes a position. I mean, really it doesn't matter. This is just an exercise, so don't get hung up on who takes which position, but distribute them. Then take 2 to 3 minutes for everyone where you think about your interest behind your position. So if you have go swimming, why do you want to go swimming? How important is that to you, and where's room for an agreement? Then you're off for the first round. Within the first round, there are 4 roles. 2 people will be negotiators and negotiate what they do tonight, and 2 people will be observers. So for the negotiators, talk about what you're going to do tonight and try to focus on interests instead of positions. When you voice your interest, use the sexy structure or the connecting to others structure to structure your statements. All right. And the observers observe how you do. So observer number 1 will be observing how you listen and which structures you employ. Also, observer number 1 pays attention to what works well and how can you still improve. Observer number 2 will observe how much you focus on interests instead of positions. And also if you're using reframing techniques and how effective they are. All right, so you have 5 minutes to negotiate with 2 negotiators and 2 observers. After that, you have a 7 to 10 minute feedback phase. There, the negotiators start talking about how they felt in the exercise and what they think they did well and how they want to improve. Then the observers give feedback on what they observed and also, again, feedback. They are concise and constructive to give hints what people can improve next time. This was round number 1. The second round, which you find on slide 14, is round number 2, where you swap roles. The people who negotiated are now observers, and the people who observed will negotiate. It's the same thing all over. You have 5 minutes. You will negotiate, and the observers 1 and 2 have their particular things which they observe. Again, after you enter into a feedback round and give feedback on what went well and what to improve. And the last thing you can do in your exercise call is outlined on slide number 15. And it's an overall feedback on how did it go tonight. So everyone, again, takes 3 minutes by themselves to write down what they learned today and answers for his or herself the following questions. What will I use? When? How? And if you're unsure, you write down a question. For example, you learned that you can structure a statement, but you don't really know when you can use the structuring. So you're like, can I use it in uni, at home? What's appropriate and inappropriate? And you can formulate these questions and enter into discussion. So after everyone's written down their learnings, you go back into a group discussion where you share your top 2 takeaways or 2 things that you learned that you want to share. Maybe some things you do not want to share. You don't have to. And then you can ask each other questions or answer each other questions if there are any questions. All right. And that was or is the training for effective communication. All right. Let's wrap it up. Today I talked to you about effective communication. Effective communication starts with listening. So you listen to learn, and you listen to the 4 sides of a message, which are factual, self-revelation, relationship, and a request. I invite you to try it out. Then, how to listen actively is nodding, smiling, establishing eye contact. Again, I invite you to try it out. Then we talked about positions and interests. So you can pay attention to who's voicing a position and who's voicing an interest. Also pay attention to what politicians say, because a lot of things they say are actually positions. And sometimes that's hampering compromise and consensus. Because if you voice a position, again, it's absolute, and somebody else is voicing their position, and they clash. So try out to find interests behind positions and find room for agreement. And the third thing we talked about is structure. Try and be sexy. Try and connect to others. I wish you a lot of fun and good learning with today's exercise on effective communication. If you have any questions, please email me at meyer@be.boosted.org. And I hope that you can profit and benefit from this exercise, and I wish you good luck and have fun. Bye-bye.